Um, Hello everybody. This is a project demo of the collaboration verification and validation engine. We belong to group 34 and 26. This is a short overview of the working model of our project. The project basically consists of three parts, wherein the first part is where the tenant can submit the requirements into the database and also can view all the approved broker approved services from the database. A visual of the service repository is made available to the tenant. In a second part, the service providers can look into the database, query the database, and view all the requirements, subscribe to any of the requirements, submit the web services relevant to their requirement, and also can upload the test scripts of the submitted services. In the third part, the broker can download the test scripts which has been submitted by the service provider, can run through the test scripts. We use N unit for running the test cases. The broker can then update the table about the status of the each test cases which has been provided by the service provider, and when all test cases have successfully run, in that case the corresponding service will be registered into the database, else a reject or a failure message is updated in the table, which is then notified to the service provider that the submitted service has not um, followed the standards or the requirements which has been submitted by the tenant. Um, so this is the first page of our project. This is a login page where the tenant, the service provider, and the broker can log in. A corresponding table has been made into the database. It is the tenants table which holds the user ID and the password of the tenants, providers, and the broker. It is validated, every login is validated against this table, and based upon their authentication, they move on to their corresponding pages. A tenant moves on to his requirement submission page. A provider will be able to do his following tasks based upon this login ID, and the broker will be able to test after logging in successfully. Yeah. So initially the username is provided by the tenant. Tenant 1 is the username, and he provides his password 1, and then the login button is clicked. This is the home page of the tenant, wherein he can view the broker approved services by clicking on this button, and he can submit the requirements by clicking on this button. In submit requirements button, he'll be able to give him his new requirements. In the service name, he can provide the service name. In our case, for the demo purpose, we have used temperature conversion as our service name. A short description of the service is given, Celsius to Fahrenheit. He can provide his input parameters, the data type which he wants to be used in his service, the output parameter, the output data type. In our case, we are using double, and he can provide sample inputs and output 32, and the corresponding output is given as 102, and submit requirement is given. In this case, soon after the service is submitted, the corresponding table is updated. Rec list is the table which has been used, and the sixth entry, temperature conversion Celsius to Fahrenheit, and the client ID, that is 1, is being updated into our table. This is the client aspect of it. He can also view all the approved services We now move on to the second part of our project. Hi, I'll be going over the provider part of the collaboration verification and validation engine. So starting off from the login page, so as we've mentioned before, we have three different login redirections for the client, the provider, and the service broker. So suppose I log in as provider. Uh, this is the service provider profile page which is viewed to him. So he has three options, which is to either view all the submitted requirements by the tenants. The second is to view all his own subscriptions. The third is to submit services for testing, because in the model we have taken, so the tenants submit a set of requirements to the engine. The service provider can view all of them and subscribe to them, and he'll develop services for the same and submit them for testing by the broker. So in the first option, if we see where I have view submitted requirements, so to see the requirements submitted by tenants, as you can see, the list box is populated with the requirement name, temperature conversion, and requirement description, Celsius to Fahrenheit. So similarly, we have many. So if I select a particular one, description to calculate, and again, in this list, in this drop-down list, I select which requirement I want to develop the services for. That is, which requirement I want to subscribe to, and I click subscribe. Your subscription has been submitted. So this shows that the provider ID, which is the ID of the service provider currently logged on, and this requirement ID that he has subscribed to goes to our subscriptions table. So this subscriptions table keeps track of which provider has subscribed for which requirement and helps us to identify basically which provider is developing the service for which requirement. So now if I again go back to the provider homepage, and again, as he's logged on, the session variable will still reflect only the service provider login. So now if he just wants to view which all requirements he has subscribed to, so this will show service name, which is temperature conversion service, and description to convert temperature, and it will also show submitted by, as you can see, one. So submitted by one basically shows the client ID or the tenant, the ID of the tenant who has submitted the requirement. So the third option that the service provider basically has is to submit services for testing. So now when he wants to submit services for testing, to make it easier for him to submit service for a particular requirement, we display the list of subscribed requirements, since he can submit services only for the requirements he has subscribed for. So say I pick this, enter service name. So now each service provider has an option to mention whichever service name he wants, because a number of service providers can pick up certain requirement and they can develop their own services. So suppose I just give say temperature conversion dot WSDL, and I click submit service. Yeah, there is no change reflected in the page, but I can show you that so this is our MySQL prompt. So if I say select star from okay, so tech subscript. So now this shows the subscriptions which has the provider ID and the requirement ID. So now when he clicks on submit services, that goes to the services table. Yeah, so I can again show you how the services table is getting populated. So now you have the requirement ID, which is based on whatever requirement ID he clicked, which is the latest entry, as you can see. Then this is the URL of the WSDL file. This is the service ID, which is it's an auto increment attribute. So each time a new entry is made in the table, it's incremented by one. So now you have the provider ID, which is obtained from the session variable of the provider currently logged on, and status is P. So the status P is inserted by default for each entry, which means that the status is still pending for testing. So now when we go to submit test cases and test files. So along with submitting the name of his service and the WSDL URL of his service, the provider in our case also submits his test cases and test files. So now why he does that is, so now he mentions a list of test cases and their descriptions, and the status of all the test cases will be pending. So now all these test cases are tested by the broker. So in our engine, the broker is the sole testing engine. So all these test cases are tested by the broker, and their status according to pass or fail is accordingly updated by the broker. So now uploading test files, why this is necessary is because our testing method is IDE independent. So now if somebody has developed a service using Visual Studio or another IDE, the broker does not need the same IDE for testing. So we've been using the NUnit framework for testing, and while elaborating about the broker framework, this will be touched upon in more detail. But NUnit, again, it is an open source tool for unit testing. So NUnit enables us to write test cases for a particular test method. So the broker can test different methods of the service by writing test cases and test fixtures using NUnit. So the status of the test cases as executed by the broker will be shown later, but for now, so when I click on get services, this drop down list is populated with whichever services was submitted by the provider. So if I click this, if I enter test case name, say test method 1, and say this is a divide by 0 test case, status will initially be pending, and if I say submit test case, so yeah, no changes reflected here, but as I will again be showing you in the table, it select as you can see, the latest test method 1 has been added. Again, the test case ID is an auto increment feature. The description has been updated by divide by 0. So now the status is set as P, again, which is pending, and this table also stores the service ID, which is 2, which is whatever he has selected, whatever the provider has selected here. So now this table is updated, as in this attribute, that is the status attribute, will be updated by the broker after he runs the test cases. So now all the broker needs for testing the service using NUnit is the DLL file and the config file. So we have also provided a file upload option. So the provider, after submitting his service test.dll, sorry, just a second. Okay, so yeah, so suppose I take, yeah, there's DLL here, and I upload the config file here, as you can see, and submit to database. When you click submit to database, again, yeah, no action is seen, but as I can show you, what happens is in this file upload, the files are stored in this subfolder here. So as you can see, in the folder called files under website 2, calculator test1.dll and calculator test.dll, which is the DLL and the config files, are stored by the provider. So just to, yeah, so now when I say select star from test files, where we are basically storing, as you can see, so now the service ID which the provider had selected, that, and under test script, the name of the DLL file, which is calculated test of 1.dll, and test config, which is calculated test.dll.config, are stored. So this is used basically later by the broker for the purpose of testing. So this covers the provider. Section of our collaboration, verification and validation engine. Now we'll be talking about the broker part.
For the broker part of the implementation of our project, we need to enter a broker ID and his password. Then, as we are differentiating our project into three different kinds of pages, we'll get into the broker login page or the broker home page. The broker home page has all the requirements that are published by the user, that is the client, and all the services that the service provider is writing, or the service providers are writing for the requirements, can also be seen by the broker. And we can also see the test cases for which the testing has to be done by the broker. So first we get all the requirements. Then, based on a certain requirement, we can get all the services that have been written for that kind of requirement. And then the broker can get test cases for all those services. The broker can download based on the test cases, we can download the test scripts from the server. That is, the broker can download the test scripts from the server and store it on the system. We are giving two files for the broker. That one will contain the .dll file, the another will be XML configuration file for the .dll file. The XML configuration file will help the broker to connect with the WSDL configuration that the service provider has set for those test cases. And next, the broker can then use NUnit, which is on the system, to check the test cases. After the testing, the broker can update the status of the test case as passed or failed using the change status button that we have provided. As let's see. Also, he can set the status of the service as approved or rejected. Once the service is rejected, it will no longer be displayed by the portal. This is the broker interface. For our application, and with this, we conclude the demo. And thank you.